Welcome to the Sunday service of the First Church in Boston, a Unitarian interim minister. His sermon is entitled COVID's Consequences.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Church in Boston. Some people call it Boston's oldest church. Some people call it Boston's newest church. Some people that are here looking at these walls might call it Boston's grooviest church. Wherever you are listening to us, we appreciate you tuning in. If you're on the internet, you can come down to downtown Boston and see us live anytime, and we might have something interesting to say to you at that point. Today we're talking about the consequences of COVID, and I want to give you a little bit of classical Hebrew wisdom to start us off on it. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Our opening hymn is number 344, A Promise Through the Ages Rings. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. I will invite you to join me in the First Church Boston affirmation, which is in your order of service, if you care to stand. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, faith, love, and help one another. Thank you. The announcements are in your order of service, and don't think anything needs to be added to them. They're quite extensive. So you get down to the almost next to the end. You got a piece about food coming up next week. Come on down and help us demolish some barbecue. And farewell to me happens on the following weekend, June 18th. So this is my third from the last service that I will do for you in my 2-year interim ministry contract. So we'll go on to joys and concerns, unless someone else has an announcement that's not covered here. Nope? Okay. Jacqueline's concert, right? Jacqueline's concert is Thursday of the following week, not this coming Thursday, but the Thursday of the following. That's the 16th, I believe. 15th, thank you. So anyway, Jacqueline, who has been the minister's wife here and occasionally has done some music, wanted to have a farewell concert to say thanks, First Church. So that's what's happening. Is the mic on? Yes, wonderful. So I'll start off with a great joy I have, and that is that I am actually employed for another year. So I just managed to get an offer from First Parish in Hingham, which is better known as Old Ship, where I will be following another banjo-playing minister, Ken Reed Brown. He was there for 33 years. I don't think I'm going to last quite that long. But I'm going to be a contract minister at least for 1 year in Hingham. And I will think about you all here in downtown Boston. By the way, that church is historically connected to this one because in both churches, the ministers in the 18th century really worked out what we now think of as Unitarian theology. So Charles Chauncey here and Ebenezer Gay in Hingham. Now, you don't have to top that. But come on forward. I see my wife.
I want to thank the music committee for agreeing at a very late date to a concert. I've been away most of the spring, and I want to especially thank Gigi for really jump-starting it and pushing it through. And I'm really looking forward and would love to see you there. I regret to say that this is my last Sunday here with Edmund in the pulpit because as a working musician, next Sunday I'll be in Vermont, and the Sunday after I'll be in Washington, D.C. So I'm already missing you a lot as I stand here. So thank you for how you've opened your hearts to us in these last 2 years, and we're very grateful. And I'll be around. You can talk to me at the end of today's service, or I hope you'll come on June 15th.
7:30.
Good morning. So this past week, I celebrated my 35th year at NEC. I've been doing the conservatory since 1988 as an employee and 27 years as the registrar. And I also, this past week, announced my retirement. So I'll be retiring from NEC in September. And I'm looking forward to having time to actually make more music than I have for the past 27 years. So.
Rosemary.
Good morning, everyone. We had two happy occurrences in the family this week. One was our daughter's dear friend, Emily. at age 41, gave birth to a 9-pound, 10-ounce, 23-inch baby boy, Elijah. So that went very smoothly. It did turn into a C-section, but very happy news. And then my sister, who lives in our small hometown in Pennsylvania, our second or third cousin, her daughter graduated from the local high school as the valedictorian. And then across the street from my sister, another young woman graduated as the salutatorian. And both of them are going into environmental science studies in college. So that seemed very hopeful as well.
Thank you. Anything else? I'll leave one stone in here for all the joys and concerns we hold in our hearts unspoken. Responsive reading, I believe we have. No, we didn't go out of turn. I was trying not to go out of turn myself.
Please join me in the responsive reading, number 521, in your gray hymnal. Here. This is by Eusebius. May I be no one's enemy, and may I be the friend of that which is eternal and abides. May I wish for every person's happiness and envy none. May I never rejoice in the ill fortune of one who has wronged me. May I, to the extent of my power, give needful help to all who are in want. May I never fail a friend. May I respect myself. May I always keep tame that which rages within me. May I accustom myself to be gentle and never be angry with others because of circumstances. May I know good people and follow in their footsteps.
Thank you, Joanne. Now we'll have the anthem. Thank you for that beautiful anthem. The sermon reading is an article in the New York Times about 4 months ago called, "Why is Everybody So Angry?" The stories of bad customer behavior began trickling out in the summer of 2020, when businesses that had closed in the early part of the coronavirus pandemic began to reopen to a new angry mood in the United States. At a restaurant struggling with staff and food shortages in Massachusetts, for instance, a group of diners grew so furious at the long wait for food that they demanded it be boxed up and then theatrically dumped the whole order uneaten into the garbage. It's like abuse, Brandy felt Castellano, who closed her Cape Cod restaurant for 24 hours to give her weary staff a day of kindness break, told the Times that July. People are always rude to restaurant workers, but this far exceeds anything I've seen in my 20 years. The Times has been covering this unpleasant phenomenon since it began. In August, my colleague Tacey Reichter wrote an in-depth article about the abuse being visited upon flight attendants who were caught between customers angry about COVID-related rules and their responsibility to enforce those rules. Airplanes are among the few places these days where people are locked in an enclosed space for hours with others who might not agree with them politically. And the flight attendants reported that they felt something new and frightening in the air. What really hurts are the people who won't even look at you in the eye, one said. I don't even feel like a human anymore. With help from our friends at the morning newsletter, we invited readers to tell us what they had experienced as customers or as workers in public-facing jobs. We asked, why was everybody so angry? The responses were shocking and unsurprising. Unsurprising in that we had seen it for ourselves and even felt it sometimes. The surges of rage at the airport, the annoyance at having to wait outside to present a vaccination card at a restaurant, the near despair when some product in the store was unexpectedly unavailable. What was shocking was how widespread these episodes were and how egregious the behavior. From across the country, employees told stories of trying to manage customers' out-of-control petulance. The supermarket clerk who had to deal with a man's outburst in the dairy aisle because he could not find the Cambozola, a type of blue cheese he wanted. The flight attendant forced to listen to a political lecture from a passenger who had followed him into the galley, raging about injustice. The supervisor at a Midwest trade association who said that her once reasonable customers had become just plain mean, berating and threatening her staff for the pettiest of reasons. I interviewed a dozen or so of the respondents about their experiences. As with so many things in the pandemic, it was clear that reality had begun to shift, and that what once would have been horrifying, this outpouring of rage against the backdrop of constant low-grade mistrust, had become the new normal. As the storekeeper with the tantrumy customer told me, you're looking at someone and thinking, I don't think this is about the cheese. Our sermon hymn is 346. Come sing a song with me. Thank you. Please be seated. COVID's consequences. As I am wrapping up my time here at First Church in Boston, I want to try this morning to get some perspective on what has happened here in our community and the nation and the world as a result of this pandemic. Now, all that happens is not entirely due to the pandemic. For if you're having a conversation, about what the future might hold for First Church in Boston, you might start with what effect the pandemic had on this institution. And that would get you into sorting out what have been consequences of COVID and what have not. As some of you know, I have not been standing still as I leave here, but have actively engaged in search for a new position with another church. I'm to the point where I can announce, as I just did, that I'll be serving a one-year contract with First Parish in Hingham, better known as Old Ship. One of the issues which arose in the course of my conversation with that congregation's search committee was the effect the pandemic had had on different kinds of people and institutions. As I looked into that issue, it occurred to me that both of these churches had suffered some damage from the pandemic, and this might make a good sermon for First Church. I hope it does. My time here straddles the pandemic, for it had hit more than a year before I came. When I arrived in August of 2021, our First Church buildings had been closed and the worship services were being filmed in segments and then sewn together. Upon my arrival, the COVID protocol had softened to the extent of allowing people to gather in person so long as masking was strictly observed. We lifted the ban on the building slowly and deliberately, and everyone had to wear masks for some time. At one point, the wastewater level of the virus showed a spike, and we shut down again and went back to pre-taped services for a while. That closure lasted only a few weeks. Almost the only thing going on when I got here was the worship service and some financial studies being made by the Board of Trustees. There was very little committee activity, and I can understand and appreciate that. We had all been learning that social isolation was the best way to avoid catching the virus. And avoiding catching it was a high priority in those days before vaccines. A large number of those who caught the virus in those days progressed to serious illness or died. One cannot fault church members for staying home, especially if the live stream of the services was of good quality. During that time period, volunteer energy and hours suffered a substantial hit, and the church needed to be run mostly by staff. That is not ideal, and thankfully some of that volunteer energy is coming back now. We are able to create a committee now, let it set its goals and let it figure out how to accomplish them. This has been done to good effect, for example, with the broadcast committee, which has managed to continue functioning throughout the pandemic. Thanks to all who have helped in these efforts. I've tried to get an impression of the overall effect of COVID-19 on our society, on our communities and churches. We have several negative psychological states which are being blamed on the pandemic: despair, fear, anxiety, aggression, loneliness, isolation, post-traumatic stress disorder, and probably above all others, anger. Anger is what you hear people talking about. Let's say you've had a bad day at the office and you come to your house and there's a guy there from your internet service provider explaining the terms of a new policy for which you might be eligible. It just might be the straw that breaks the camel's back and you've exploded again. It's some perfect stranger. An article in the New York Times last year set out to answer the question, why are people so angry? I think that question answers itself. People are angry because they can't have everything they want, as they used to before the pandemic. I should say everything they want when they want it. We've been forced to agree to a time of relative scarcity because the whole economy has slowed down. But we feel acutely that loss from our former prosperity. I look at myself, and I notice that I have gotten a lot less patient in traffic or waiting in lines of any kind than I used to be. Sometimes I'm mentally taking apart the display of ignorance being put on by the person just ahead of me in line. I don't know why that comes over me. I found an article in a publication of Mass General Hospital's Department of Psychiatry a little over a year ago on how to cope with COVID anger. It said this about where the anger came from, quote, "Anger is a basic emotion that helps us effectively navigate life's challenges. It can be protective by alerting us that a particular experience or situation might not be good for us. To use anger adaptively," this is the quote from the MGH article, "to use anger adaptively, we must pair it with higher order cognitive skills that help us with planning, organization, and reasoning. But these executive function skills," that's what the psychologists call them, executive function skills, are exactly the ones that are harder to access when anger first arises in our brains. It takes some extra work to effectively channel anger. And after 2 years of living with COVID, it's hard to find the resources to do anything extra, unquote. COVID, in other words, ratchets up the stakes for living safely. There's a virus out there, and it can kill you. Some people want to wear masks, some don't. Sometimes the people wearing the masks appear to think themselves superior to the unmasked, or the unmasked appear to enjoy their liberation, but they do so at the expense of increasing the general risk. We're all succumbing to tribalism in the way we think about masks and other precautions. The MGH article then goes on to offer some specific techniques for coping with anger. And this is what I think might be useful for you all out of that. So five headings. 1, take a minute before you think or act. Anger and impulsivity are a dangerous combination. Give yourself a minute to recognize that you're angry, to identify why you're angry, and to start to think about the choices you can make to respond in the situation. In other words, you might have on your computer a little sign to remind yourself, don't send until you've thought. 2, watch out for negative thought patterns. Anger can trigger negative thought patterns like being highly critical, seeing things as all bad, or thinking that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If we catch and shift these thoughts, then it can make it easier to release anger and engage in effective problem solving. 3, focus on what is in your sphere of influence. It's normal to be anxious or angry when we perceive that we're being harmed by forces beyond our control. We can't make COVID go away, but we can choose to spend time and energy focused on positive things in our lives that we can control. 4, make time for yourself. When things are stressful, it's important to build in time to recharge. Just a few minutes a day of deep breathing, exercise, engaging in a pleasurable activity, or venting to a loved one, even venting, can help to release anger and prevent future raid episodes. And lastly, 5, learn to effectively communicate your needs in a way that respects yourself and others. This can be a hard skill to learn on your own, especially as an adult. If this is a struggle, then a good therapist can help you to identify and practice strategies that allow you to stand up for yourself without hurting others. So that bit of psychiatric wisdom is brought to us by our local and very excellent hospital. It doesn't say that anger is bad or destructive, though we all know it can be. But rather than aim to eliminate all anger, it would seem to be better to learn to channel that anger into more positive and productive ends. If you can do that, you're not only improving your mood, but improving the world at the same time. It is interesting that one of the other psychological forces that might be active in a mind which has lived through COVID is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Some of you may remember the project in Rwanda, which we talked about here in First Church in January of this year. That program is aimed at some type of reconciliation between those who participated in the 1993 genocide in Rwanda. And in those villages, they start with the observation that PTSD is found through testing in almost half of the adults who lived through the genocide. They deal with the PTSD in a variety of ways. Some of it is storytelling, and some of it is breathing and dance exercises. It seems to be having some effect. I'm not suggesting that you go right out and copy what has been found to work in this very different cultural setting. But it is important that we realize that almost everybody we meet has been affected by COVID in some way. Realizing what others have been through is the essence of empathy. Our own Dr. Helen Reese is a pioneer in empathy therapy and wrote a book on it, which she and I discussed in a sermon last year. How do we summon up empathy for someone when all we can feel is anger? It takes a special mindset and then enough discipline to respond with understanding when someone else is trying their dead level best to push your buttons. I've discussed anger and listed several other negative emotions: despair, fear, anxiety, stress, aggression, loneliness, isolation. Someone said that it is very strange in the English language we have this word loneliness, which means the state of being alone, when this state is exquisitely painful to us, and at the same time have this other word from different roots, which means being alone when that state is the path to wisdom, mindfulness, and fulfillment. And the word for that is solitude. Loneliness and solitude are two very different words to describe the same state. And loneliness is, for many, an integral part of the post-COVID picture. Of course, the good side of the picture is that many of us have learned to use high technology to alleviate some of the social isolation, to connect through the internet when we can't connect in person. We have strategies for coping with social isolation, but sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I read somewhere that people in my age group, mid-70s, are finding it hard to make or hold friends, and some of them are attributing this to COVID's isolation. But in the same article, the author found that people in that age group, particularly men, had always found it difficult to make new friends at that age in life. So here's an example of where people might attribute a particular social problem to COVID when it has been around for decades before COVID. When we say something is a consequence of COVID, are we speaking only of medical aspects of the pandemic? Because it might be that the most influential result of the disease is not medical, but economic. We have had real problems getting the supply chains reconstructed so that complex manufacturers can stay in business. We Americans are often masters at consuming what the market offers. And when we don't have just the right food to put on our tables, we can get petulant, if not cross. Fortunately, the supply chains are coming back online. And so we first world consumers can rely again on finding our specific hazelnuts on our kitchen shelves. We can expect for the consumer COVID rage to play less and less a role in American culture than it has played in the years since the pandemic arrived on our doorsteps. Not everything that is challenging happening in our churches right now is due to COVID, but some of it is, and it's important to know what that consists of. The secret of growing the church is to make everybody who walks into the door feel welcomed. It is also important that each person on that first visit has a few moments of grown-up talk. We all suffer from loneliness from time to time, and our forebears found that an antidote to that type of loneliness is engagement, connection, such as one gets at a well-run church. COVID has had its consequences for our churches and for the rest of society. But it's important that we might not make COVID out to be more influential than it was, or less so. It had a deep impact, and many innocent victims died. Our churches will not be exactly the same from here on, but if we can practice doing church with compassion, if we can write and speak, and above all, listen to one another with empathy, we can put our churches back together again. I will try to do that in my new church, and I'd like to see you try to do it here after I step through the door. What is our takeaway here? There's a crying psychological need for those gathering places these gathering places we call churches. There's a need for the witness they can furnish of the power of love. Sure, COVID has had consequences on all our lives, and that affects the daily relationships we are called to navigate. Some churches may not recover from COVID, but the ones that do recover will be the ones that keep in mind UU values, particularly kindness, compassion, and empathy. Let us reknit the strong relationships that made First Church such a joy to belong to. You have great leadership for this next phase, and I have confidence that if you work together, you can bring this great church back. Amen. Now let us receive our offering for the advancement of this church.
If you'd like to support the work of this church with a financial donation, you may write out a check to First Church Boston and mail it to 66 Marlborough Street, 02116. You can also donate via text. Simply text the dollar amount, 5, 10, 20, etc. to 617-917-5610. Sorry. You will receive confirmation by email. Thank you.
extinguishing the chalice with the words in your order service, we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. 299 is our closing hymn, Make Channels for the Streams of Love. Found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace. Amen.
Please feel free to join us live each Sunday at 66 Marlborough Street at the corner of Berkeley Street in Back Bay. If you would like more information about programs, services, or membership at First Church, please visit the website www.firstchurchboston.org or send an email to office@firstchurchboston.org. Thank you, and have a great Sunday afternoon.